He was just the janitor, the man everyone passed by without a second glance. To them, he was invisible, just another worker mopping floors in the Navy's shining halls. But one afternoon, when the Admiral joked about his strange code name, something in the room shifted. The laughter stopped. The man's silence spoke louder than any rank or medal, because behind that mop and uniform lay a story no one was ready to hear, a name whispered with respect in places only the brave had walked. Who was Lone Eagle, and why did his truth make the Admiral fall silent? Before we go further, pause for a second and think, how many people like him do we ignore every day? If this already made you feel something, hit the like button right now. It tells YouTube this story deserves to be heard. Before anyone knew his name, he was just Mr. Harris, the quiet janitor who cleaned the Navy headquarters long after everyone had gone home. He moved through the empty corridors like a shadow, polishing the floors where metals once clinked and laughter once echoed. Most people never even looked up when he passed. He didn't mind, or at least he pretended not to. He'd worked there for years, punctual, polite, invisible. Every morning, he'd nod to the guards, mop in hand, and whisper a small prayer under his breath. To them, he was a man with a humble job and a quiet soul. But there were things about Mr. Harris that didn't quite fit. The sharpness in his eyes, the way he stood tall when no one was watching, and the faded Navy tattoo hidden beneath his sleeve. That day started like any other. Coffee steaming in the Admiral's office, orders being barked down the hall. Mr. Harris entered silently, bucket in tow, as the officers joked about rank and code names. The Admiral smirked, glancing at him. "What about you, Harris? Got a code name, too?" The room erupted in laughter. He smiled faintly, eyes lowered, but didn't answer. Something flickered in his expression. A ghost of the past, maybe. The Admiral didn't notice, not yet. But that single question had stirred something buried deep, something that didn't belong to a janitor at all. The laughter that day didn't bother Mr. Harris, at least not on the surface. He'd heard worse. But something about the Admiral's tone, the way the men looked at him like he was beneath them, stirred a storm he'd kept buried for decades. As he mopped the floor, their words echoed in his mind. "Code name," they said. If only they knew. Later that afternoon, Harris was called to clean the Admiral's conference room after a long strategy meeting. Papers scattered across the table, maps of old operations laid open, classified ones marked with red ink. He paused for a moment, his eyes tracing familiar lines and names. It was the same region where Lone Eagle had flown missions that were never meant to be spoken of. He exhaled sharply, forcing himself back to work. But as he reached for the trash bin, the Admiral walked in. "You again?" the man said, not unkindly, but with that same dismissive tone. "You always seem to show up when I'm working on important matters." "Yes, sir," Harris replied quietly, eyes on the floor. The Admiral studied him. "You look familiar. Ever serve?" Harris hesitated. "Once upon a time." The Admiral smirked. "Let me guess, kitchen duty? Logistics?" That one stung more than Harris expected. He nodded faintly, hiding the tremor in his hands. That night, as the building emptied, Harris stayed behind. He moved silently through the dark halls, his steps echoing off the marble. He stopped before the Navy's Wall of Honor, dozens of photos, medals, and faces of men who'd served with valor. His gaze landed on one picture, faded and half forgotten at the edge. A younger man in uniform, eyes proud, code name stitched beneath, Lone Eagle. For a moment, he stood frozen. The past crashed over him like a wave, the missions, the chaos, the men he couldn't save, and the silence that followed when the country he'd bled for erased his name. They'd given him a code name for heroism. Then they'd taken it away for the color of his skin. If you're still watching right now, you're one of the few who care about stories that matter. Stay till the end, because what happens next will change how you see people forever. The next morning, the Admiral arrived early, surprised to find Harris already polishing the floors outside his office. "You're early," he said. Harris looked up, his expression calm. "Habit," he replied. The Admiral laughed lightly. "You take this job too seriously." "Old habits die hard, sir," Harris said, straightening just slightly, enough to make the Admiral pause. There was something in his posture, the crispness of it, the unspoken authority. Before the Admiral could respond, one of his aides rushed in holding an old operations file. "Sir, this just got declassified. You might want to see this." The Admiral took the file absently, flipping through, then froze. There, staring back at him from a black and white photo, was a younger Harris. Helmet on, eyes steady, code name, Lone Eagle. And in that instant, the Admiral's smirk faded into silence. The room fell silent. The Admiral stared at the photo in disbelief, his lips parting as if words might appear, but none came. The aides shifted uneasily, glancing between the picture and the quiet man standing before them. The janitor. The one they'd laughed at. The one they thought was invisible. Mr. Harris didn't move. He just watched. Calm, controlled, decades of discipline in his stillness. He'd faced storms louder than this silence, missiles, fire, and the sound of his brother's last breaths. This was nothing new. But the way the Admiral's voice cracked when he finally spoke, it hit harder than any explosion. "You were Lone Eagle?" Harris nodded once, slow and steady. "Yes, sir." For a moment, the Admiral just stared, the color draining from his face. The file trembled slightly in his hands. He glanced again at the mission report, the one about the rescue op that saved an entire squadron, the one they said was classified because of a technical error. But now, seeing the truth standing right in front of him, the Admiral knew the reason it was buried had nothing to do with national security, and everything to do with skin color. I didn't know," he whispered. "I'm sure you didn't," Harris replied, voice soft but heavy with years of silence. They made sure no one would. The room felt smaller now, the weight of history pressing down. Harris stood tall, not as a janitor, not as a worker, but as a soldier who'd been erased and forgotten. The Admiral's eyes dropped to the floor, shame flooding his expression. And then, in one quiet motion, Harris reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn patch, the faded emblem of his old unit. He placed it on the table. "For the men who never came back," he said. "And for the ones who did, but were never seen again." He turned to leave. No one spoke. No one dared. The Admiral's voice broke the silence. "Lone Eagle, wait!" But Harris didn't stop, because some truths don't need permission to be heard. The next day, the janitor's closet stood open, mop still leaning against the wall, bucket half filled, the floor shining like glass. But Mr. Harris was gone. No one knew where he went. Some said he resigned. Others said the Navy quietly reached out, trying to make things right. But those who were there that day knew. There are some debts time can never repay. The Admiral never joked about code names again. In fact, weeks later, he had that old mission file restored. Not just in the records, but in the Hall of Honor. And for the first time, beneath the photo that had once been forgotten, a new plaque was placed, Lone Eagle for Valor Beyond Recognition. When Harris heard about it, he didn't return. He didn't need to. His story had already spoken louder than any medal. Years later, recruits would walk past that same wall, pausing at the photo of a black man with steady eyes and a name that once echoed only in silence. They'd ask who he was, and someone, an officer, a janitor, maybe even an admiral, would tell them. Because the truth has a way of surviving even when history tries to bury it, Mr. Harris never sought revenge. He only wanted to be remembered, not for the battles he fought, but for the dignity he never lost. In a world that tried to erase him, he remained unshaken, unseen maybe, but never defeated. And perhaps that's what makes heroes like him different. They don't fight for recognition. They fight because it's right. So the next time we walk past someone invisible, someone the world overlooks, maybe we should look again. Because you never really know whose story you're standing next to. If this story moved you, don't just scroll away. Subscribe to the channel for more real human stories that deserve to be remembered. Share it with someone who believes respect has no rank, no color, only courage.